How do I know if my kid is relapsing?
I mean, a lot of times you don't. That's the reality is, because they're masters at fooling us, right? And sometimes we get hung up on wanting to know. Is my kid using again? Did he relapse? And it's like that we're operating out of fear and control. I think for me, learning to see that relapse was just going to be part of recovery, and that at the end of the day, if my son was relapsing, it was going to get exposed eventually. It just helped me to, like, my job wasn't to be there to prevent him. I put my wife in touch with a mom up in Dallas that I met recently who's in crisis, and she's like sleeping in the bedroom with her 16-year-old daughter who's been like leaving the house at night. That shit doesn't work. So that's kind of like not really a direct answer. It's like, on the other hand, it's like trusting the counselors and the other kids and your gut. When you've been in the program and you're working the program, you can begin to recognize, like, if something's off, there's probably a reason. But also, like, part of it also is if you don't have a plan B and you're not prepared for a relapse, then you're going to be in denial longer about whether your kid is relapsing or not, because you want to avoid that happening. Whereas if you have a plan B, you know that, okay, when this happens, we'll be ready. And your kids will pick up on that. And so I think, part of that is just how it's exposure, like we talk about, like how healthy is the family doing. So relapse tells us like where we're falling short. So I don't know if that makes sense, but expecting and being prepared and not letting it throw you off your recovery is a part of, like, it tends to, like, relapses tend to, like, not recur as much when you have that attitude, as opposed to, like, oh my God, if my son relapses, it's going to be like, that was our first, I can tell a story. Like, we, my son went into a rehab facility before we found Cornerstone. In 6 days there, he climbed over the wall and walked 16 miles home in the middle of the night. And I'm like, oh, I got to get him back. And then we went into Cornerstone, and Joe was like, all right, the backup plan is to send him to Sundown. And, like, I didn't have health insurance and I wasn't employed at the time. And I'm like, oh, no, that can't happen. And sure enough, he runs off and comes back, and we got to send him to Sundown. And so it was like almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy, And then I learned to, like, all right, it's good. I can't control it. So better to, like, expect it to happen and recognize, like, it's not the end of the world. It's just another part of recovery.
Yeah. Jerry?
You know anything about relapsing?
I do know about relapsing. My kid has relapsed more after awakening than he did when he was in the program. And I remember the first time he relapsed, he was 15 years old. And he looked at me, and I was, like, devastated, of course. And he looked at me, he said, Mom, you are so clueless. You have no idea when I'm using, I can run circles around you. And it was crazy. I was on the crazy train. My son's name is Aiden, and Aiden the addict is very different than Aiden sober. And so the one thing that I learned to recognize about when he was relapsing was when his behavior changed, because Aiden the addict is kind of an asshole. And so when very recently, just even a couple months ago, he became Aiden the addict, and there was no, like, discussion about using or are you high or this or that. It was like I looked at him, and when he came back as the addict, it became very evident that he had been using, and that helped me have that discussion with him as opposed to avoiding it. So for me, the way that I know that he's using is that he changes, because Aiden sober is an amazing person, and he's a really nice, kind-hearted person, but he does change when he's using, so hopefully that's helpful.
Do you have something you want to say there? It's up to you. Go ahead.
First, I like what Karen said, like you don't always, but I can tell you what I was like before I went to the mental hospital, and it was not like an all of a sudden thing. It was like a build-up of like dishonesty over months of like low self-esteem and suicidal ideations. I was not being fully honest with like other people and using my support system, and it like I think one of the biggest differences between like when I'm unhealthy versus like when I'm healthy is like I still deal with hard things now. But when I'm like unhealthy and I'm on the track to relapse, like I deal with hard things and I crumble. And so having like a team that's like emotional or going something hard does not necessarily mean that they're relapsing. It just means that something's hard. But I think for me it was like a failure to deal with those things. That was a big indicator.
Yeah, so I'll give you guys like a couple kind of tangible things that you can use as like measuring sticks or kind of put in your back pocket. Well, the first thing I'll tell you about like a relapse or a reset is one, like it's not the end of the world. It doesn't have to be a part of someone's recovery, but for a lot of people it is. And that's okay. If there's a relapse or a reset, I really like interpret that behavior as like your kid waving their hands, screaming for help, and the only way that they know how is by acting out and saying that through their behavior, saying like, I need more than this. Like what we're currently doing is not working. I need more. And if you guys are imperfectly but consistently like working your own programs and you're plugged into a support group and you're like coming to some meetings, Cornerstone, Al-Anon, working with a sponsor, that kind of stuff, then the chances of a relapse or a reset putting you on your heels or throwing you back into a place of chaos or confusion are a lot less. And like Kieran was talking about, if you have a plan B. And if you're doing those things, then your parenting self-esteem is going to be regrowing and getting bigger. And so I would tell you guys to like trust your gut. You know, your gut and your instincts are God-given, therefore good. And your intuition is like what happens when your past experience collides with observation. You know, and like when you're paying attention to like your kid and their behavior and things like who are they spending their time with. You know, like there's never going to be anything more important for your kid than them having healthy friends, or we call them winners. It's going to be part of our like next question that I'll let these guys expand on. But you want to pay attention to that. Like who are they spending their time with? How are they treating me? What is their behavior? What's their schedule like? You know, like what's their routine? You know, 90% of honesty is like, do I do what I say I'm going to do, and am I where I say I'm going to be? And if your kid is doing what they say they're going to do and being where they say they're going to be, then chances are, it's no guarantee, and there never will be, but chances are that there's some honesty, you know, at play there. And if you're paying attention and you're watching those things, then you won't be surprised by it, because nobody just like rolls out of bed into a relapse. Like relapse doesn't just happen. Relapse takes time, over a period of time of me like not taking care of myself, of getting complacent in my program, like letting my relationship with my sponsor slip, letting my commitments become like optional. You know, if your kids' commitments start to become optional, those are like some red flags to like look at and pay attention, because we want them to be developing healthy habits for their life that will serve them long after they're not in a program or not in Cornerstone anymore. And you could start that process now by having them give you a solid meeting schedule / regular schedule that involves things like yoga or bike rides or softball or family night with their sponsor, and having that be like a real commitment and something that goes on the wall or on the fridge next to their shots that everybody signs. So it's like a contract, it's like a covenant that your kid is making with you. And then that gives you a measuring stick of like, is my kid doing what they say that they're going to do? Because if they're not, then it's my job as the parent to recognize that and to use my shots or to hold them accountable.